Next, we're going to move to item 2. I think Gunner's got some information for us today.
Good afternoon, council, staff. You remember my associate, Sherry McCall?
We can't really hear you, sorry.
Sorry, I'm trying to make room for Sherry, too. Sherry's going to help us out. We are here today for the work session, and of course there will be another public hearing at the council meeting this evening. We are moving towards the final adoption of the single-member districts pursuant to the charter amendment election for the December 3rd. Currently, we are targeted for the December 3rd council meeting to finally adopt a map. And so we are in the process of trying to identify maps for consideration at that time. We don't have to select one this evening that goes forward. We're just trying to identify the pool of maps that can be before the council for the final vote on December 3rd. And currently what we have, there have been essentially 3 plans that are under consideration. There is the proposed illustrative plan, which we drew with you at the drawing session and which the council designated as the illustrative plan. There is a revision to that plan that was introduced at the last council meeting. And then there is, as of today, we received a third plan that was submitted by the NAACP. This is a copy of it here. It is similar in many respects to both the illustrative plan and the revised illustrative plan. The changes that you will see occur primarily here in District 6, and then there's, because of these changes in District 6, there's a little bit of overflow or movement in District 5 as well. One of the things to note about this plan is that we have actually reached out to the representative of the NAACP who has submitted this plan. It was provided to us in a PDF format, and one of the problems with that is when we try to zoom in to see exactly kind of where the boundaries follow, what geographic boundaries they follow, it gets very blurry, so we can't tell. And because of that, we can't tell whether they followed census geography or not, and where the exact population distributions are, and so we can't confirm as of right now that this plan ultimately balances out. We're going to try to get some more specific information. We have reached out. I think the representative of the NAACP is actually supposed to be here this evening, so we plan to speak to him then if we see him. If not, we're going to follow up after this meeting. But we will confirm that and have that to you in our format for your consideration well in advance of the December 3rd meeting, so that all 3 of those plans will be in the same format, so we can identify the same granular level of detail and have all of that for your consideration in making the final vote. If there are any other changes or revisions that you folks want to make, we're here. We're able to do that at this work session, or otherwise I think there's a plan to have a public hearing on the plans that have been submitted so far this evening before the final adoption on December 3rd.
All right.
Anybody has any questions for me about any of the plans, I'm happy to address those.
Any comments? Yes, sir. Councilman Nicholas.
I don't have a question on the plans. But when we began this process, there was discussion about people talking with you all, meeting with you all, and my sense was, and I think it was more than my sense was, I thought that we had agreed that conversations with you would be taped in public. It was either you're going to be in a meeting, public meeting or not. And I have no idea whether you've talked to any of us or not outside of these meetings. So I just thought, hey, I'll ask. Have you talked to any of us about any of these plans, had any discussions or any related discussions, the legality of it? And I'm not asking you what you talked about, but have you had any discussions with any of us outside of these meetings?
We have not discussed any of the items you just mentioned with any of the council members outside of these meetings. At the first meeting when we discussed different ways of going about this, one of the options was for us to conduct personal factual background interviews. The council made the decision that it would prefer to have all of the discussions occur in public. And so what we did instead was facilitate the public meetings, the public input meetings that we held in North and South Mesquite, which were in fact recorded and made available for everybody to go back and watch. And so outside of those meetings or public meetings, we have not discussed the items that you have just mentioned with any of the council members.
Good. Thank you.
Any other questions for Gunnar? We will be having another public meeting at during tonight's council meetings.
We look forward to seeing you then.
Mayor, I do.
Oh, yes, sir.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Just kind of.
Please.
Gunnar, if you could help me out, how did the second map get initiated to be drawn if you didn't have discussion with us additionally?
The second map was done in consultation with staff, Mr. Casper.
Staff directed you to draw that?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And this was presented just by email?
The NAACP plan?
Yes.
Yes, that was forwarded to us by email this afternoon.
Okay. Any other questions? Oh, sure.
Just thinking.
Please.
So this map, right now, you can't tell whether it's within or outside of the deviation?
That's correct. We were provided with some demographic data that appears to balance, but we just can't get down to the granular level to plug that in to double check to be sure.
How quickly are you going to be able to do that? For example, if you were able to discuss this with whoever submitted the map, are you going to be able to provide that for us? Like, you and him or her work through it and, yeah, that's it, that's what I meant. And then, boom, you can, spit out those numbers and provide those to us tonight?
Yes, our hope is, well, I can't guarantee it'll be tonight. Our hope
Right.
is that the representative of the NAACP will have either a close-up map that they could provide us, or better yet, a shape file or data file that has the specific data points that we can then just plug in and overlay the map that we already have. That will be the quickest. The alternative, if we don't have that, is to confer with that representative, talk a little bit more about the specifics, and then try to kind of plug it in from that way. I will tell you, we tried to recreate it visually, and we're unable to get it to balance that way. So we just need a little bit more information.
And is that going to include a comparison with our illustrative map?
From a demographic standpoint?
Well, all of it. I mean, for example, population deviation, are
Absolutely.
we adding more to 6 and less to 5? What are the ethnic breakups in comparison to the illustrative map? Are you going to be able to do that?
Yes, we will provide all of that breakdown.
Good, thank you.
Mr. Casper, do you have any
Yeah, I do.
follow-up?
Thank you, Mayor. And this one is for our city manager. Cliff, can you help me understand the timeline and the sourcing of why staff felt compelled to draw a second map?
I was approached with information from a group of residents who were asking a question about the breakup of the districts 4 and 5, and wanted to present a map for consideration that showed what those districts would look like with a separation along New Market Road. And I worked with Gunnar and his group to just bring that to council's attention based on the input from the residents I'd heard from.
Gunnar, how accessible were you and your firm for any resident who wanted to draw a map? Is that the process that the NAACP should have gone through? They should have talked to Cliff and directed you to draw their map? I guess I'm confused because I think we told residents to draw their map and present it to the council.
If Mr. Brown, Henry Brown was the representative from NAACP, if he had approached me saying he wanted to draw a map, we would have helped to facilitate that for the ease of discussion. That was the primary reason why we worked on the maps the way we did.
Okay, I don't
would
feel
help-
like
would
that
help-
part was clearly communicated. At any point, I think I even made a joke about having my high school classes draw maps. And I don't think that we made it known to residents that they could reach out to the city manager's office with some stipulations and that we would whip up a map for them.
This was a new process to us, and we were, again, trying to be helpful and help council get to a decision as clearly as possible. As you can see, this map lacks in clarity, and that's what we tried to do with Mr. Brown today, was get in touch with Gunnar so he could put a good map together, just for the purpose of showing the council what the expectation was.
I think there are some helpful lessons for us to do next time around. But I would really recommend to whatever legislative body does this the next time, the people around that table, that it's all done in public, that it's all the conversation is taped and recorded according to the will of the council that we said kind of the first go around, and that if we were going to draw additional maps, that they would be done before we had public hearings in the community, in our Parks and Rec. The fact that all that came afterwards.
I think the request was basically as a result of the public hearings. The one that I received was a result of those public hearings, and just a question of why, and
What do you mean, why?
why the districts were drawn in the way they were, and could we draw them differently? And that was the initiation of that map, the revised map.
I just feel like we're missing out on a big part of the story of even their questions. If this body ultimately has to vote on some of those maps, I think the conversations that were had, reached out to you via phone or email, I think that would be a good analysis for the people who are going to be voting to have some input on or knowledge of. I don't feel like I'm better informed. I'm just presented a map.
Certainly.
Thank you. Any other? Yes, sir. George?
Well, and good question so far. I'll just kind of weigh in a little bit and say, going into the previous meeting where the revised map that you presented, Mayor, I was somewhat, on par to kind of move forward with what we had all come together as a group and made a few adjustments there. However, I said last time that I certainly want to make sure that every voice is heard. If there's some other citizens who, had those desires or had those concerns about the lines changing that you mentioned last time, Mayor, that, I want to be open to everyone and listen to those concerns. So I guess my question would be, to add on to Mr. Casper's question, the individuals who had voiced those concerns, are those names on public record, or will they be coming to speak to us? That would certainly help me if we could hear those folks out and know what their concerns are and how many, et cetera.
We can bring that forward. We definitely can do that. The other thing would be, we can also look at what we've considered. I think a lot of good conversations, and I think these are really good comments that we started with an illustrative map with the council's, decisions, head nods, not decisions, but things like that. We can always go and look at that particular map if that's the map that we had more of a consensus to move forward on, and just present that. If there's a concern, we can always do it that way as well. This body can pull back, and we can say this is what we've been. We've looked at this, and this is where we're headed, and we feel like that. This process is new to everybody. I don't know anybody in this room that's ever gone through a local city situation like this, and so to some extent we're all learning as we go. We can definitely move forward. We can do this tonight. We can see what this is, or if the body felt like, and if there's a consensus that, the illustrative map, the one's been presented, because I'm listening. I understand, and that would be the one we felt like was stronger for this body to consider, and we can do that as well. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When we would be able to get a copy of the names of those who had voiced those concerns, or are they coming tonight to speak, or do we know?
I don't know. We'd have to go.
We've encouraged them to reach out to council members as individually as well on the information that they provided to me, and then present it to this body. So I'll determine if I can release that information and provide that to you.
Oh, I thought the mayor said you'd be able to provide that.
We should be able to come up with something.
All right, thank you.
And then I just want to verify with Gunnar on our timing. We have till the second meeting in December. There's not a deadline to pass this on the 3rd of December, correct?
That's true. The only deadline is to have it done by the end of the year.
Mayor. Yes, sir. Please.
Thank you. I'm certainly fine with us all knowing who communicated with city staff, who submitted maps or made suggestions. I wouldn't want any of that to not be public and knowable and known to us and the public about what happened and who said what and what was it. But I would say that what I'm most focused on is not trying to sit there and judge which person submitted which map or which question or which item, but what is the most superior map, based on what is the most superior map, what is most reflective of what our citizens want. If someone that is a political ally or a political opponent submits a map, that doesn't have weight to me compared to what does the map do and does the map represent the citizenry. A good example and what we seem to have done is inordinately focus on this New Market neighborhood and whether a boundary line in New Market gives a political advantage or disadvantage to Mr. Archer and Mr. Burrows. And that seems to be almost the entire discussion. And that's disappointing. I would have hoped that the real discussion would have been, is the New Market boundary line a boundary line that provides cohesiveness for the neighborhood, for that community? And is that neighborhood, if it's drawn cohesively, is it attached to a district with similar interests that enhances the demographics and represents the citizenry, not whether it benefited or harmed any individual council members? And I haven't heard much of any discussion on that. After our last meeting, I went and drove that neighborhood, and I looked at the New Market line, and I looked at the neighborhoods on both sides of New Market, and on one side of Pascal Park and another, to try and get a sense of whether that made sense as a boundary. We never had that discussion here, and that's disappointing. What I would also had hoped that we would have done is had a discussion about whether Oates was a proper boundary line, whether Galloway was a proper boundary line, whether Beltline was a proper boundary line, whether Cyene was a proper boundary line, whether 635 was a proper boundary line. Are these neighborhoods cohesive? Do they have a historical meeting together? And I've said many times that Rollingwood Hills, Galloway, and the Skyline Rugal neighborhoods, I believe, needed to stick together, not because it was advantageous or disadvantageous to any particular council member, but because those neighborhoods had a historic, cohesive, common interest together. And I would have hoped that we had had that discussion, but we did not. So I'm going to say right now, and I'll say after the public hearing, that I do not believe that the New Market line and the Pascal Park line is a proper boundary line between council districts. I feel that the neighborhood both north and south of New Market and east and west of Pascal is a cohesive neighborhood and needs to stay together and not separated by an arbitrary boundary line. I have always felt that that neighborhood should go east towards the Mesquite High neighborhood and the Pioneer neighborhoods, but that was not to be. It seems like the rest of the council rather like that being attached to Northridge for some reason. I would also say that I felt that Northridge had more in common with Samuel Farms, and that a more proper boundary line would have had that district, southern boundary line being the railroad or perhaps military, somewhere along that lines. But we never really had that discussion either. So I'll just close in saying that I wish we'd talk a lot less about which council member was ending up in which district and whether or not there was a conspiracy, and a whole lot more about whether the neighborhood should be put together, whether we're drawing lines to create and keep cohesive neighborhoods that are together in common interests. I had hoped we'd had a lot more of that discussion and a lot less of what we did.
Thank you. Mr. Casper?
Thanks, Mayor. I was just going to remind you that the very first questions I asked during the public hearing were about the revised map and whether the deviation was closer or farther away from where we wanted to be. I think in every way the revised map is an inferior map. I too have driven the area. And north of New Market, those neighborhoods are similar to the ones south of New Market. And to split along that line, I don't think makes any geographic or demographic sense. In fact, the only intent seems to be to create safe districts for incumbents, which is not particular incumbents. I don't care who. I don't have a dog in the race. I'm not running for re-election. But the simple truth is that the only change to the revised map was one that creates 2 safe districts for 2 people sitting around this table. And I think it's the very essence of what people are disgusted about with broken politics of redistricting that happens in Austin and Washington. I think it's the exact opposite of what our residents wanted to see when they approved term limits, is not a perpetual incumbency advantage where folks just get reelected. And the fact that the only change that was made in that inferior map is one that creates 2 safe districts for 2 people on this table who will take votes on this map, I think is broken.
You know, I've kind of said all along, I think the discussion around the table is what we need to be having. I looked at these maps quite a bit over the last several months, actually, and in terms of incumbency, many of these districts are around the 1, 2, 3, 4 men that are sitting around this table already. I mean, they're already drawn that way. I will say publicly on record, because I've said this privately to different people, the way this thing is set up, it's set up for our incumbents that have already been working in these areas for the last 2, 4, and 6 years. I don't know that how you can ever get away from that when you're doing this the first time. I believe that's probably true. That being said, and since I brought this other one forward, if this council's, and I'm not getting behind anything at this point, but tonight, one way to take care of this, if we would like to have head nods that the second map presented is something that we would take off the table for consideration, I would recommend and be happy to do that. I've already heard from one that says no. I know there's another that says no. So we can remove that from consideration because that's all part of this process. Anybody want to weigh in? Mr. Nosa?
Yes. What's interesting to me is that the reason the evaluation of the map and its motivation was discussed at the last meeting and the way it was discussed was that the stated objective for the people that were advocating for this map was that they wanted to keep the current council. That was the stated objective. And so it was through that lens which we viewed the map, which is incredibly frustrating to the entire process. Because this process, this is historical, as Councilman Archer has mentioned on numerous occasions in what we're doing. And this is the point at which this council is to act as leaders and to look at the men that are sitting around this table is to limit the citizens' actions that they took in May. And it's to limit it to the people. It's to limit it to this very time rather than giving it the elasticity that the citizens wanted. To vote for a map like that, to vote for a map that's going to protect this existing council and keep this existing council, is to perpetuate the good old boy network that many of you have campaigned that you were all about breaking up. And so to me, the focus was proper in the last meeting is that we can't do that as a council. We can't go to a citizen's concern and say, because you're concerned and you want to keep the existing council, we're going to draw the maps this way. By doing that, we are creating and perpetuating the very system that some of us have campaigned against, in which the voters in May told us, yeah, you're right. We're gonna adopt term limits. We're going to go with these single member districts, and it's all about breaking up this good old boy network, so to speak. So I truly think that we would be doing a disservice to the citizens that come after us if we were to perpetuate the idea that this map is a good idea. So I think my head nod is that we just take this map off consideration.
That's 3. I would concur. That's 4. You're welcome to weigh in.
I concur.
That's 5. That's 6. So we're removing that, guys. Thank you for your comments. I appreciate it very much. And thank you for allowing this. I mean, to me, I think we ought to have these conversations more and more and more. This particular presentation, we can do the same thing, or we can wait till tonight. Do you have any comment one way or the other? Yes.
I mean, we've got an NAACP map that we don't even know
Right.
whether it's a viable map, meaning the deviation works or not, and what changes, if any, in ethnicity
Right.
for these districts cause. That's why I was asking the questions. Can they give us those numbers tonight so that I can attempt to make a proper evaluation on this newly provided map or not? If I don't get that, I can't really make that evaluation. And I want to be able to make an evaluation. This is an important interest group in Mesquite. They provided a map, and I know I sounded like a broken record, but I wish we had a lot of different maps to be able to discuss a lot of different cohesive neighborhoods and what the numbers did and whether that neighborhood should have been with this neighborhood. I am truly disappointed that it seems like we grabbed onto this first map and then that was it until we got the revised map and had to try and, well, at least I did, had to try and figure out, regardless of its intent, whether or not it was a better map or not. Now we're not going to go forward on that revised map, as I agree is proper. So I'm not ready to go forward until I at least know what this map is. And we don't have to. December 3rd is, or even December 17th, is well and good to adopt maps. And now that Councilman Casper is had a televised discussion about people streaming into Mr. Kahili and trying to get assistance in drawing more maps. Maybe we'll get more maps. And I would love to see more maps. I would like to see some of the cards shuffled, some alternatives provided by more of our citizens.
It went out. There you go.
Am I back? Okay. Yeah, sorry. To do that. So I'd like to, I'm not prepared to go tonight. I'd like to push it to at least December 3rd. And maybe we won't get any more maps. And if we don't get any more maps and we get to December 3rd and we're at a certain point of comfort or not, or just, we don't have anything else to evaluate, then I think we may go forward on the 3rd. But absent knowing that, I'm not going to vote in favor of any maps tonight.
Mr. Archie,
I think Mr. Noche was before me.
Yeah, so I tend to agree. I'd like to see some more data on this and get the demographic analysis that we need. But also, I just want to make sure that it's clear, in case some people are just now tuning into this process, that the illustrative map that we generated was the product of a number of hours of us sitting and actually, I think you were even approaching the map and changing the map. And so there were a number of different maps that were in process that night that either did or did not meet the criteria and the deviation that we have to meet. So I think to say that there was only one map is to somewhat shortchange the process, because we did have a public meeting in which there was a lot of input from each of the council members and how we were looking at the map, how we were looking at the different neighborhoods. And so, there are a number of maps, and I'm eager to see if more maps come about too. That would be exciting. It kind of reminded me of the in The Jerk when Steve Martin is trying to avoid all the oil cans, right? All these maps. So.
It's a while ago.
Mr. Archie.
I was just going to say that I came into tonight thinking that we would most likely do what we just did, which was kind of get rid of that revised map. And I figured we'd probably go with the illustrative map that we had all kind of circled around and given our input on. However, I would concur with my colleagues that I would not be comfortable at this point now moving forward till we've been able to see the whole picture with this NAACP map that's come forward. So I want to make sure that we all know exactly what they're proposing.
Yes, sir, go ahead.
I did speak with the representative from the NAACP. He will be up here at 6:30 to work with
Good.
Gunnar and his group.
Good.
So hopefully you can see what that map looks like tonight for the public hearing.
And we have, I know you want to speak, but
No, I'm-
we also have, and I'm fine with the 3rd, I'm fine with the 17th. We do need to do it before the end of the year. We do have the opportunity, it's on the agenda if there was a conclusion tonight, so.
No, I was going to counter, and it's not a direct countering for what Councilman O'Shea is saying. But I will say, yes, we did spend several hours working on the illustrative map, but I don't presume that the 7 of us are smarter than the other 143,000 people in this town. And I think you would be surprised at what a group of citizens, not the 7 of us, could come up with. And you might be surprised at something that someone else provides that you go, oh, hey, yeah, that makes perfect sense. We ought to do that instead. And I think that we needed to make sure and communicate to our citizenry and encourage, and I am still hopeful, that we get exactly that. We get a lot of different options because I can't speak for the rest of y'all, but I don't know everything. And I certainly am not going to sit there and presume that something that we cook up after a couple of hours of work is the wisdom of Solomon and it should be chiseled on stone. I actually went into it saying to myself, okay, this illustrative map is a starting point. It is an initial point that we will then spur our citizenry to provide alternatives. And that's why I've been disappointed at it. Disappointed that we haven't had multiple maps and been able to hash out neighborhoods and cohesiveness, and we'd had neighborhood leaders talking about, well, I think that we should stay with this neighborhood. We've worked together in crime watches, et cetera, and that we worked through this process and been responsive to that. So, yes, several hours, that's true, but I would hope something that would last, although it's only going to last for one election probably. I think it'll be highly suggestive of the maps that go forward 10 years from now, or for the next 10 years. It may probably suggest to the next council to stick close to that. So I think it's very important that we get as much information from our citizens and not just rely on the 7 of us to come up with a map.
Councilman Casper?
Thanks, Mayor. I was just going to recommend to staff, that this process is creating a precedent, and I think that's important. Why we removed Map 2 it creates a standard. But my recommendation going forward for the next council that does this the next go-round would be to foster the development of multiple maps early in the process and then conduct the listening tour in the community where you can take them and put them side by side and maybe have that vigorous debate among crime watch leaders and neighborhood leaders on which one's the best. I think the problem that we do it now is that we'll have folks show up for the public hearing, but it won't be the 35 engaged people that we had at the rec center, that night. And so whatever we can do as an organization to foster the development of maps really early in the process, multiple ones, I think there'd be great value in that.
Very good point. So 6:30, we'll look forward to your findings.
We'll be there. Thanks much.
Well, I say findings. Whatever, if they have a chance to bring us some information you have a chance to bring forward possibly. How's that better?